And we're going to do our chapter book today. Again, we are reading from J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. I'm reading personally from my illustrated edition that was illustrated beautifully by Jim Kay. And of course, J.K. Rowling has given permission for teachers and librarians to read this to their kids during the COVID-19 closure, and we really appreciate that. We left Harry when he had, in the middle of chapter 2, The Vanishing Glass. He had gone to the zoo with Dudley on birthday, and on Dudley's birthday, and he was having a pretty good day, which for Harry doesn't happen very often. And the last thing we kind of left you with was Harry felt afterwards that he should have known it was all too good to last. So that was kind of a little cliffhanger that we left you with. So we're going to start again in chapter 2, The Vanishing Glass. They're at the zoo. Let's see what happens. This is one of my favorite parts. Of course, you're going to hear me say that a million times because all of it's my favorite part, honestly. After lunch, they went to the reptile house. It was cool and dark in there, with lit windows all along the walls. Behind the glass, all sorts of lizards and snakes were crawling and slithering over bits of woods and stone. Dudley and Pierce wanted to see huge poisonous cobras and thick man-crushing pythons. Dudley quickly found the largest snake in the place. It could have wrapped its body twice around Uncle Vernon's car and crushed it into a dustbin. At the moment, it didn't look like it was in the mood. In fact, it was fast asleep. Dudley stood with his nose pressed against the glass, staring at the glistening brown coils. "Make it move," he whined to his father. Uncle Vernon tapped on the glass, but the snake didn't budge. "Do it again," Dudley ordered. Uncle Vernon rapped on the glass smartly with his knuckles, but the snake just snoozed on. "This is boring," Dudley moaned as he shuffled away. Harry moved in front of the tank and looked intently at the snake. He wouldn't have been surprised if it died of boredom itself. No company except stupid people drumming their fingers on the glass trying to disturb it all day. It was worse than having to cover it as a bedroom, where the only visitor was Aunt Petunia hammering on the door to wake you up. At least he got to visit the rest of the house. The snake suddenly opened its beady eyes. Slowly, very slowly, it raised its head until its eyes were on level with Harry's. It winked. Harry stared. Then he looked quickly around the house to see if anyone was watching. They weren't. He looked back at the snake and he winked too. The snake jerked his head towards Uncle Vernon and Dudley, then raised his eyes to the ceiling. It gave Harry a look that said, quite plainly, "I get this all the time." "I know," Harry murmured through the glass, though he wasn't sure the snake could hear him. "It must be really annoying." The snake nodded vigorously. "Where do you come from, anyway?" Harry asked. The snake jabbed his tail at the little sign next to the glass, and Harry peered at it. "Boa constrictor, Brazil." "Was it nice there?" The boa constrictor jabbed its tail at the sign, and Harry read on. This specimen was bred in the zoo. "Oh, I see. So you've never been to Brazil." The snake shook its head, and a deafening shout behind Harry made them both jump. "Dudley! Mr. Dursley! Come and look at this snake! You won't believe what it's doing!" Dudley came waddling towards them as fast as he could. So I like this picture, even though snakes are not my favorite, but this is a really cool picture of Harry talking to the snake. Dudley came waddling towards them as fast as he could. "Out of the way, you!" he said, punching Harry in the ribs. Caught by surprise, Harry fell hard on the concrete floor. What came next happened so fast no one saw how it happened. 1 second, Pierce and Dudley were leaning right up close to the glass, and the next they had leapt back with the howls of horror. Harry sat up and gasped. The glass in front of the boa constrictor's tank had vanished. The great snake was uncoiling itself rapidly, slithering out onto the floor. People throughout the reptile house screamed and started running for the exits. The snake slid swiftly past him. Harry could have sworn a low, hissing voice said, "Brazil? Here I come. Thanks, amigo." The keeper of the reptile house was in shock. "But the glass," he kept saying. Where did the glass go?" The zoo director himself made Aunt Petunia a cup of strong, sweet tea while he apologized over and over again. Pierce and Dudley could only gibber. As far as Harry had seen, the snake hadn't done anything except snap playfully at their heels as it passed. But the time they were all back in Uncle Vernon's car, Dudley was telling them how he had nearly bitten off his whole leg, while Pierce was swearing that it had tried to squeeze him to death. But worst of all, for Harry at least, was Pierce calming down enough to say, Harry was talking to it, weren't you, Harry? Uncle Vernon waited until Pierce was safely outside of the house before starting in on Harry. He was so angry he could hardly speak. He managed to say, Go! Hubbard! Stay! No meals! Before he collapsed into a chair and Aunt Petunia ran to get him a large brandy. Harry lay in this dark cupboard much later, wishing he had a watch. He didn't know what time it was, and he couldn't be sure the Dursleys were asleep. Until they were, he couldn't risk sneaking into the kitchen for some food. He'd lived with the Dursleys almost 10 years, 10 miserable years, as long as he could remember, ever since he'd been a baby and his parents had died in that car crash. He couldn't remember being in the car when his parents had died. Sometimes, when he strained his memory during long hours in his cupboard, he came up with a strange vision, a blinding flash of green light and burning pain on his forehead. This, he supposed, was the crash, though he couldn't imagine where all the green light came from, and he couldn't remember his parents at all. His aunt and uncle never spoke about them, and of course, he was forbidden to ask about them. There were no photographs of them in the house. When he had been younger, Harry had dreamed and dreamed of some unknown relation coming to take him away, but it never happened. The Dursleys were his only family, yet sometimes he thought, or maybe hoped, that strangers in the street seemed to know him. Very strange strangers they were, too. A tiny man in a violet top hat had bowed to him once while out shopping with Aunt Petunia and Dudley. After asking Harry furiously if he knew the man, Aunt Petunia had rushed them out of the shop without buying anything. A wild looking old woman had dressed all in green and waved merrily at him once the bus. A bald man with a very long purple coat had actually shaken his hand on the street the other day and then walked away without a word. The weirdest thing about all these people was the way they seemed to vanish the second Harry tried to get a closer look. At school, Harry had no one. Everybody knew that Dudley's gang hated that odd Harry Potter and his baggy clothes and broken glasses, and nobody liked to disagree with Dudley's gang. And we're going to stop there because we just got to chapter 3, The Letters from No One. That's another part. That's one of my favorites. I hope you guys are enjoying this read aloud, and I hope you guys are doing well. I really wish that I could see and talk to every single one of you, but we'll be together sooner rather than later, I'm sure. Have a great night. I will see you tomorrow. Always keep reading.